We're on page 539 in chapter 10, and we're going to be working on the homework exercise, which is exercise 1. So let's begin by reading the instructions. It says, create a class named Horse that contains data fields for the name, color, and birth year. Include get and set methods for these fields. Next, create a subclass named Racehorse, which contains an additional field that holds a number of races in which the horse has completed, and additional methods to set and get for the new field. Write an application that demonstrates using objects of each class. So it doesn't tell you how, but we just had an example in the You Do It. The first You Do It exercise gave us an example like that. So we'll create something that will work with it. All right, so we're going to have two class files that do not have executables, and that's going to be horse and racehorse. And then demo horses is going to be the executable file, which is going to show us that it's all working. All right, so let's begin by taking care of this bit by bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy the instructions here, and I'm going to go into Eclipse. I'm going to create a new project. And the truth is I can actually create it in the same folder as we did with our You Do It. That's absolutely fine. In terms of handing it in, though, it would make more sense to have them separated. So why don't we do that? Let's make a new project. Let's call it Chapter 10, Exercise 1. Let's right-click the source folder and create a new class file. And the first one's going to be called Horse. Does not need a main method. And then it gave us very clear instructions here. And here I am breaking my own rule. I'm going to paste in the instructions. And yes, I know it's throwing a bunch of errors, but I'm going to put in my CSS style comment marks. And our task, at least here, is to create a class named Horse that contains data fields for name, color, and year. That's our objective. So to do that, what should I type first? Now you can look at stuff you've done before. So for example, if we look at what we did here with party, which still happens to be open, everything's going to be private. All right, so that's a good starting point. So why don't we start by saying private, and we need name, color, and year. So if we do name, what string, and can we just call it name? Okay. And really we should probably indent this. And then we got another private. And this one is for color. What data type are we going to use? Yes. And then we have year. That should probably be an integer is a good choice. All right. So our next task is to create sets and gets for each one of those, right? I'm going to pause for just a moment. All right, so our task now is to create those gets and sets. So let's just take them one at a time. Let's start with name. So we can use this as a blueprint, really, right? Or as an example. So for guests, we did a get guests. That means it's returning something. That means it needs to be kind of in this format. So why don't we do that? Let's go to public. We said we're returning something, right?
Yeah.
If we're doing a get for name, what are we returning? String. Okay. And what's the name of the method? Get name makes sense. We could use some curly brackets. And what's it going to do? What's it going to return? The name. Okay. Now we also need to do a set. Is the set going to return anything? All right, so then we do a void. What are we going to call it? But if we're going to set a name, we need to receive something, don't we? What data type would that be? Maybe a string? And we need a name for it. No, I'm not asking you to actually name the horse. Why don't we do H name for horse name? All right, so what will happen then is name will get set to H name. We need a semicolon. Now we're just going to keep repeating that process. So we're going to do a public string, get color, and then we're going to do a set for it. All right, and now what I want you guys to do here in class is guide me on the last one, since I've done these. The pattern should repeat. So what should I do now? Oops. Get your caps lock. Doesn't matter. It's just a convention that we use. And typically it's a good idea to follow convention, but does it truly matter? Not really. What am I returning? Yes, we're returning year. And then additionally, what about this next one? Are we sending anything in? Maybe just do this. All right. And then what happens here? Are we done? We are. And what I'm going to do here, for my own sake, I suppose, is I'm going to extract the contents of the remaining instructions I have left, but this is what we did. So I just left the comments in there. Be verbose with your comments. If you're not sure of what's going on, it's a great way to kind of keep notes. And I know you hear that in all your programming classes, but as you start to write more complicated programs, it really does help to kind of keep things sorted. All right, so this is the horse class file in its entirety. 3 attributes, gets and sets for each one of them. All right, let's go ahead and do an S to save. And let's move on and make the next one. I'm going to pause for just a moment. Okay, now that we've gone through the process of manually creating this class file and then manually writing the setters and the getters, which is a very common operation in Java. So of course, some geek like us thought, well, if we're always doing getters and setters, is there a way that we can do that a little bit faster? Well, there sure is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an additional attribute here. We're not going to use it, but I just want to demonstrate the process. All right, so I just created a new int called whatever. And notice if I click on that, right-click it, and then go to the source menu. And you can also do that from up here, by the way. You don't have to do it through a right-click. Notice this option here. What does it say? Makes it pretty easy, right?
Why does use this?
Because it refers to itself.
So should we be using this?
If you want. Well, the reason, okay, let's look at why it's using the word this. Because whatever it's passing in, which is whatever, is also happens to be the name of the integer, but this is the one that's coming in. We're setting it to the one that is part of this, as opposed to the one that's coming in. Yeah. So we are using our own names. The program is using this keyword. So that's just an example that there's. That's exactly correct. You could use the same name. So in other words, you could here say name, lowercase, and I suppose I could demonstrate it. I could say name, come down here, name, this, fixed. All right. So that's just a little bit of a demonstration, and hopefully that makes a little more sense as to what this is and what this does. Yes, it does mean that instead of this. All right, so I'm going to remove that now. So we're done with the one class file. I'm going to save it. Let's move on to the next set of instructions. So we need to create another class file. So I'm going to go ahead and do new class. And what's this next one called? Racehorse. And let's go ahead and click Finish. Now, I have that instruction that it should still be in my buffer here. So it says, next create a subclass named Racehorse, which contains an additional field that holds the number of races in which the horse has completed and additional methods to get and set the new field. All right. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with the comments before, because I'm going to make it, I'm going to move this part to the next file. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. It says create a subclass named Racehorse. So what that means is that Racehorse is going to extend, plural. What is it extending? Horse. Okay. Then it says an additional field that holds the number of races in which the horse has completed. So therefore, we are going to create a private. It's going to be an int, that's correct. And what should we call it? Completed races. All right. And since we learned this handy new trick, right? Where's that source menu? There it is. And we're going to generate getters and setters. Just click OK. Done. Little magic. All right. It's not cheating. It's part of what the tool does. When you guys are using Visual Studio and Intro to Programming and it was IntelliSensing for you, did you consider it cheating? Some old school programmers would say absolutely. But it's not cheating. It's the tools that we have available, so we use them. All right. All right, so I saved this, and then I cut the last set of instructions out so we can work on the next file. And so we're going to create another new class file. And this one's going to be called Demo Horses. This one is going to have a main method because we do need it to execute. And then we're going to click Finish. And then once again, I'm going to paste my comments down here. It says, write an application that demonstrates using the objects of each class. All right, we already know the names of all this stuff. So now we have to kind of follow the same approach we used before. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to pose the challenge to you here in class to help me write this. I'm going to have you get started working on it, and then we'll come back and see if you're testing all the capabilities. Okay. Use the example that we had with use dinner party as an example. And that's from the first You Do It exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and save this in its current state. I'm going to pause the recording, and then we'll come back in a few minutes and work on it some more. All right, as we're working through this, I want to refer you back to the PowerPoint slide that we were looking at earlier tonight. And remember, we were looking at this UML diagram, and I explained to you how this is a nice, small, convenient little way to spell out all the little features of a class. So I can see what the attributes are, the data fields, and I can also see all the methods that go with, and including the data types, what they return, and the arguments that they accept. And then when I have one that extends another or is a superclass, or I just have a number of them, it's kind of handy to have these little UML diagrams, and very often you can go ahead and you can design these before you code anything. In fact, that can be helpful as a shortcut. And when you have those diagrams, you can do what I did, which is I took the code that we had from Horse and from Racehorse, and then I used my Notepad++ to create a very primitive UML diagram, or indicator, however you want to look at it. And so I can very quickly look at this piece of information here right before I build my application to mostly know the names of the things that I'm contending with and what needs to go where and what gets sent in and what doesn't. Now, granted, the examples we're using right now are pretty simple, and you might remember them off the top of your head. But if you're working with much more complicated class structures, boy, trying to remember all the data fields, trying to remember all the methods can really be kind of daunting. So having this here as a guide, I will know very quickly what I can name things and not name things. Now, granted, I can't draw an arrow inside of Notepad++, but I could do it just like the book did, which shows that this extends that by just drawing an arrow. But instead, I wrote it right here, extends horse. Okay, so now I know the names of everything, what they return, what they accept, what data types they are. So that's a handy little guide. There are some computer science programs, computer science degrees, where they have entire courses on UML. Why? Because object-oriented programming is that important. So I want to give you this exposure so that you're aware of this as a tool. All right, so if we go actually back to Eclipse and start to code this, we already have the basic structure of the program. I went ahead and I created some code here that I'm just going to paste in, and then I'm just going to walk through it and explain it to you one at a time. Remember, the objective of this is to write an application that demonstrates using objects of each class. Now, we don't have to go through the trouble that we did inside of the dinner party program, and that meaning, prompting the user for a value and then storing it and then setting it and getting it. This is a little bit more of a brute force approach, but that's actually fine. So what we're doing here is I'm creating a horse, which is just a regular old horse, and we're calling it horse 1. So this horse has all the capabilities that you can find in horse. So it's got a name, a color, and a year. Sets and gets for all of them. Racehorse has this capability, completed races, and because it extends horse, also has all of these capabilities. Right, so after I declare the two horse objects, I've instantiated them, I go through, and for horse 1, I set the name, the color, and the year. Set name, set color, set year. Notice I'm sending in a string, and an integer, a string, and an integer. And then we move on to horse 2. Horse 2, being that it is a racehorse, which extends horse, also has name, color, and year, but also has the added feature, which is its own, that it has the number of races it's completed, which also accepts an integer. So we have one additional set that we can do with that. Then we very simply write some output statements that send that information back to the screen so that we can see that it worked. All right, that's very simplistic, really, but that should give you a good idea of how to test it. So now all we really have to do is go ahead and run the application, and if everything is good, let's see if we can compare here. It says old paint, horse number 1, is brown and was born in 2009. Champion is black and was born in 2011. Champion has been in 4 races. Okay, so we have one that's based on, horse 1's based on regular horse. It does not have the completed races. Horse 2 is based on racehorse, which has all the capabilities of horse and has inherited those name, color, and year from horse, but has its own attribute or data field of completed races, and therefore we can get and set that particular value. So that in a nutshell is exercise 1 in chapter 10, and hopefully that has demonstrated to you, the concepts of inheritance and how it works. All right, that will end this video, and I want you to just keep in the back of your head here that as you look at this video, that this is kind of a little bit of what's going to happen when you work on your final programming project, because there is a little tidbit in there that asks you to write a superclass and a subclass where one inherits from the other, and this is very much the technique you're going to use. So it's slightly expanded from this, but not really by much. So if you get this concept of how those two things tie together, that will help you significantly. All right, that ends this video.